but he followed me, grabbing my arm before I could escape. "Hey, don't walk away from me, you little cripple. You think you can just ignore me? Didn't you hear how much of an eyesore that you are?" "I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do, though. I was born this way. I'm sorry that I'm such a burden to you and Mom." "Damn right, you're sorry. You're the sorriest excuse for a son anyone could have." It went on like that for years. My mother wasn't any kinder. Every time I'd try to do something, make friends, join a club, anything to feel normal, she'd tear me down.
You're wasting your time. No one wants a freak around. Do you know how embarrassing it is for me to have to explain you to people?
Their words echoed in my head. "Hi, my name is Daniel, and my parents are horrible people. They have always been cruel to me, and for nothing that I could even change. My parents, Donna and Frank, had made it clear from an early age that I was nothing but a disappointment to them. The issue was my leg. When I was born, it didn't develop quite right, and I was left with a noticeable limp. No one really knew what caused it, whether it was something hereditary or just random bad luck. It made everything harder, walking, running, even just standing still. I wore braces on my leg until I was 13, and even then, the limp never went away. That limp became the focal point of my parents' scorn. They made sure to remind me every day of how I wasn't like normal kids. It wasn't just the constant insults, though those were bad enough. It was the way they looked at me, like I was a stain they couldn't wash out. The worst part was, they made me feel like my disability was somehow a personal failing, like I'd chosen to be this way, just to spite them. One of my earliest memories is of my mother looking down at me, her face twisted with disgust. I must have been about 5, struggling to keep up with her as she walked quickly down the sidewalk.
You're so slow, Daniel. Why can't you be like the other kids? You look like a freak.
"I'm sorry, Mama. I'm trying."
Don't call me that. It's embarrassing when you call me that. Stop it.
The words cut deep, even back then. I didn't know what I'd done wrong, only that something about me seemed to bother her in a way I couldn't understand. As I got older, it didn't get any better. One summer afternoon, I was sitting on the porch steps, trying to avoid them. I had spent the day out, hiding in the park, reading a book to escape. But as soon as I got home, Dad was waiting for me. "You're gonna have to be faster than that if you want to run away. Though, I'm not sure anyone else would want you anyway." I wasn't trying to run away. I was just reading a book in the park. "Ugh, well that's a shame. With a leg like that though, you probably wouldn't be able to anyways." "There's nothing wrong with my leg, Dad. It's just not as strong as my other one." "Ha ha, you can't be serious. That leg is hideous. When we go out in public, people stare at us like we belong in a circus because of it." I kept my head down, forcing myself not to react. I'd learned early on that any response just made things worse. Instead, I pushed past him, trying to make it to my room without saying a word. But he followed me, grabbing my arm before I could escape. "Hey, don't walk away from me, you little cripple. You think you can just ignore me? Didn't you hear how much of an eyesore that you are?" "I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do, though. I was born this way. I'm sorry that I'm such a burden to you and Mom." "Damn right, you're sorry. You're the sorriest excuse for a son anyone could have." It went on like that for years. My mother wasn't any kinder. Every time I'd try to do something, make friends, join a club, anything to feel normal, she'd tear me down.
You're wasting your time. No one wants a freak around. Do you know how embarrassing it is for me to have to explain you to people?
Their words echoed in my head, years after I'd finally left. I was 18 when I moved out. Even though I knew that they hated me, I wished that they would either wish me luck or at the very least say goodbye, but no. They just noticed I was packing, and as soon as I started moving my boxes out, they instantly went into my old room and started planning on redecorating it. I tried to say goodbye to them, but they just shot me dirty glares. It wasn't easy living on my own, but because of my disability, I was able to get some government assistance. Sadly, it took me until my late 20s to realize I could actually cut them out of my life entirely. I'd done well for myself by then, managed to go to college, get a job, and build a life. I had my own small business, a circle of friends who treated me like family, and for the first time, I felt like I was worth something. I hadn't spoken to my parents in years when they showed up at my door one morning. I hadn't even known they'd still be living in town. I'd never given them my address, never expected them to try to find me. But there they were, looking older, weaker, and for once, desperate.
Daniel, it's so good to see you. Your father and I need to talk to you.
I didn't respond right away. I just stared at them, feeling a strange mix of anger and satisfaction. Here they were, after all those years of pushing me away, needing something from me. They must have sensed my hesitation because Dad spoke up, his voice gruff and strained.
We're in a pretty difficult situation, Danny. We made some investing choices that didn't pan out, and we are hurting for money, and we heard that you are doing well for yourself.
I'm sorry to hear that. But how does that concern me, really?
We need help. We don't have anyone else. We didn't have anyone else to turn to.
Did you try to reach out to the rest of the family? Surely you have someone else who can help you.
There isn't anyone else. We don't have anyone else.
I wasn't surprised, to be honest. Both my parents had siblings, and I had several cousins that had all done as good as myself, or better. But none of them would want anything to with my parents, as they were just awful people. They were abhorrent to me, but they were barely any better to other people. For a moment, I considered slamming the door in their faces. They certainly deserved it. But something held me back. Instead, I stepped aside, motioning for them to come in. They hesitated, then shuffled past me, glancing around my house with an air of entitlement that made my skin crawl. My father looked briefly at the vase I kept by my front door that held various canes I had collected. His face contorted in a look of disgust, but only for a moment before he threw on his best forced smile.
Nice place you've got here.
I worked hard for it. No thanks to either of you.
We made mistakes, Danny. We know that, but we're here now, aren't we? Can we please put the past behind us and just start fresh and new?
After ignoring me for years. Well, my whole life, really. Funny how that works.
We didn't ignore you.
Yes, you did. You never once reached out to see how I was doing, not in all these years. The only reason you're here now is because you want something. Most parents would have checked in once in a while on their children to make sure they were doing okay. You didn't so much as see if I was alive. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she glanced at my dad, who looked away, his face pinched. They both knew I was right. What exactly is it that you want from me? Because if you're looking for forgiveness, you're too late for that.
Here, oh come on, Daniel. We weren't really that bad. We had some good times too.
No, we really didn't.
At any rate, we don't have to let our past color our future. Daniel, please. We lost so much money and can barely afford our bills. We thought maybe you could help.
Help? You want my help?
Please, Danny, you may not believe us, but we know that weren't the easiest people to live with, and we could have been better parents. But we are family. You are our son. Nothing can change that. We're your parents. Doesn't that mean anything?
Parents? You never acted like parents to me. You treated me like a burden, like a freak. I don't owe you anything. My leg always disgusted you in spite of the fact that I didn't choose to be born this way. And even though you didn't help me, I still became successful. They are standing in silence, their faces drawn and pale. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. But then I remembered all the years of cruelty, all the times they'd torn me down just because I was different. Tell you what, I'll help you. I'll pay for your bills. But there's a catch. They looked up, a glimmer of hope in their eyes. Anything. We'll do anything. I want you to sign over your house to me, as collateral for the money I will loan you. I've done well for myself, but I still don't have so much money that I can give you whatever you want and never expect to see it again.
But that's the only thing we have of value.
Think of it as a test of trust then. You are asking a lot from me. You haven't shown yourselves to be trustworthy, and this would go a long way to make me trust you. Sign it over, and I'll cover the costs. You came to me because you were desperate. Well, this is the price.
Fine, we agree and we'll sign.
I contacted my lawyer and had them draw up the paperwork the next day, and I made sure it was all airtight. I did, however, include a few clauses that my parents didn't even bother to look over. They were so desperate for money that they just ignored them. I loaned them the money, just as I'd promised. And just as I knew they would, they started to pay me back on a regular basis for a few months, but it didn't take long for them to stop making their payments. They of course made up quite a few excuses as to why they were late when paying me back. I let it slide at first. I knew that they would see me as a fresh and unlimited amount of money. and that they would no doubt rack up quite the huge debt, because they just assumed that any debt that they accrued would just become my problem. But that was where they were incredibly wrong. It didn't take them long to earn tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt.
Daniel, we are sorry, but we can't remotely afford to pay our bills. Could you please make yourself useful and take care of them?
Why should I? Because it's the only thing that you're good for. It's not like any woman would be interested in such a weak man. Since you don't have kids, you may as well help us more. Or I could just cut my losses and demand my debts paid. What nonsense are you talking about? You see, among the things that my parents overlooked had clauses that protected me. I was listed as their primary payee. Basically, it meant that I had loaned them money, and that they had sworn that if they could not pay off their debt to me, that I would then outright own their house as collateral. The next day, I went to my lawyer and had them begin the proceedings to collect on my parents' debt. I showed that they were several months behind on their payments, and the court approved that they had reneged on the contract I had them sign. Once my parents understood what was happening, they begged me to not take their house, but I ignored them and took possession and kicked them out. I had to have the police actually remove them from the house. Once they were out, I hired a crew to bulldoze the house. My parents tried their best to get the demolition crew to not destroy their house, but they worked for me, and I threatened to call the police again if they didn't allow the workers to do their jobs. My parents watched in horror as their house was leveled and reduced to splinters. After that, they never contacted me again. I ended up selling the now empty lot and made a very decent amount of money from the sale. I did keep a small chunk of wood from the demolished house as a reminder. Whenever I'm feeling down, I hold the chunk of wood and feel empowered, using it as a reminder that no matter how dark or hopeless things get, that I'm not weak. When push comes to shove, I can always rise to the occasion. As for my parents, they ended up sleeping on the streets because no family member wanted to help them. They were awful people. As for me, I met a girl who loves me for who I am, and I'm feeling pretty hopeful for a great future with her and starting a family together. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. But she really wanted to go, and so I relented, and we left. We had a great time and spent nearly the whole weekend on the beach, sipping tropical drinks and just breathing in the ocean air. When we got home, though, both of us nearly had heart attacks when we saw our backyard. Our fence along the side of the yard that we shared with Ralph was knocked over, and all the plants between the fence and our pool were ripped out and scattered around the yard. And I don't know how they did it, but they emptied our pool and filled it with garbage. It smelled so bad that I nearly vomited. I was so angry that went out into the garage and was going to get my baseball bat and do something with it when my wife stepped in front of me and told me to calm down. Hi there, my name is Anthony, and I had the worst possible neighbor you could imagine. Now, I may have gone a bit overboard with getting retaliation. I'm usually a very calm and easygoing person, but I was pushed beyond my limits. Here, let me explain what happened, and then you'll understand what I mean. I have been living in the same house for over a decade now, and about 6 years ago, my neighbor Ralph and his family moved into the house next door. Ralph and I got along fairly well, but his teenage sons Bobby and Teddy were very unruly. They would constantly do crazy things like ride their bikes through my front yard and rip up my yard. That, or they would have pool parties with a bunch of their friends and would drink even though they were underage. There was one party in particular where they had over 24 people over and partied until 5 in the morning. They were being so loud that I got nearly no sleep at all. I was tempted to call the police, but I chose to speak with Ralph and maybe appeal to his good nature. I figured that if I called the police that it might just make for some bad blood between our families, and rather than poking that bear. I waited until Ralph came back so I could speak with him. Hey there, Ralph. I hate to be that kind of neighbor, but your sons went a bit overboard the other night.
Yeah, they made quite a mess. I guess they were just blowing off some steam.
Okay, but I had to work the next day, and they kept me awake the whole night. And they made a mess on my side of the fence even.
Well, yeah, you know how it is. Boys will be boys.
Ralph, with all due respect, that really isn't good enough. There were dozens of beer cans in my yard and they got sick in my bushes. Ralph, can you please have a word with them and try to get them not to be so rowdy next time?
Honestly, they really weren't that bad. Maybe you should just not be such a stick in the mud and just mind your own business.
His responses were not even remotely acceptable, but all I could do was hope that he would see reason, and that if the boys had another party, that they would be more aware of not being so loud the next time, at the very least. Sadly, that wasn't the case. Literally a month later, Ralph and his wife left to go away for a weekend, and I knew that his sons would definitely have a party that night. As the day went on, Ralph's sons' friends began to show up. My wife and I were swimming in our own pool in our backyard, when suddenly some teenage boys were leering over the fence at my wife and calling her all kinds of lewd names. Wow, check out the body on her.
Yeah, she's my type for sure. Hey there, beautiful. Why don't you come over here and have a drink with us?
Yeah, wow. Maybe you could take your top off at the very least. Both my wife and I were disgusted, and so we went inside. We figured that, at the very least, it would be quieter, and with any luck, that later, closer to bedtime, that they would quiet down. As midnight came around, though, they were extremely loud. Once again, I was tempted to call the police, but didn't until 1 a.m. when we heard people in our backyard. There were so many people next door that several of them spilled over into our yard and were swimming in it. As soon as I saw them in my pool, that was the last straw. I called the police right away, and a few minutes later they showed up. When the sirens and lights were going off, the teenagers dispersed and ran in dozens of directions, and the police gave chase. A few minutes later, it was quiet, and my wife and I breathed a heavy sigh of relief. In the morning, we went outside and found our backyard a complete mess. There were bags of garbage in our pool and beer cans everywhere. A large word was carved into the hood of our car that read, "Snitch." It was carved with keys, I think. When Ralph came back, I stormed over and told him that he needed to do something about his sons, or else I would call the police on them from now on. It was not well received. "Ralph, this has got to stop. Your sons are out of control."
I don't care what they did. How dare you call the police on them? My boys spent the night in jail because of you.
As they should. They are underage, drinking, and they trespassed onto my property and were swimming in my pool. They even left garbage in it and keyed my car. Ralph, how dare you defend them?
I don't give a damn about your car. I demand you apologize for getting them arrested.
Both of us were seeing red, and before I knew it, we were shoving one another, and then Ralph threw the first punch and we were on the ground rolling around, punching and kicking one another. Our wives had to pull us away from one another in order to get us to stop. We were like animals. Months passed, though, without incident. I could only assume that Bobby and Teddy were laying low so that they wouldn't get in trouble from the police. But I also knew that it was only a matter of time before Ralph left once again for a weekend away and the boys would misbehave. However, nothing happened, and my wife and I thought that maybe the last party had been just what was needed to get some sense into those boys' heads. On a whim, my wife suggested that maybe we should go away for a weekend. I was hesitant, but she really wanted to go, and so I relented, and we left. We had a great time, and spent nearly the whole weekend on the beach, sipping tropical drinks and just breathing in the ocean air. When we got home, though, both of us nearly had heart attacks when we saw our backyard. Our fence along the side of the yard that we shared with Ralph was knocked over, and all the plants between the fence and our pool were ripped out and scattered around the yard. And I don't know how they did it, but they emptied our pool and filled it with garbage. It smelled so bad that I nearly vomited. I was so angry that went out into the garage and was going to get my baseball bat and do something with it when my wife stepped in front of me and told me to calm down. We ended up calling the police, but when they came out, they told us that there wasn't anything that they could do, as there were no witnesses. They simply couldn't prove who it was that had done the damage and vandalism. It was then that I planned out my revenge. I went and got a bunch of supplies that I would need for my plan, and I waited until Ralph would go away. I didn't have to wait long, and as soon as I saw him pull out of his driveway and drive off, I went into action. Ralph always left very early in the morning for his weekend trips, while his sons always slept in nearly to noon. And so I used the morning to set up my revenge as quietly as I could. I had bought a liquid blue dye that I added to their pool in enough quantities that it wouldn't be obvious that it was there until someone jumped into the pool. I then snuck into their house through the back door and dumped rotten eggs throughout the house. I had been saving them in my garage in an airtight container and with my nose plugged and a mask on. I hid them throughout Ralph's house. I honestly don't know how Robbie and Teddy slept through it, but I got in and out without them noticing, and then I disposed of supplies I used and sat back in my own backyard and waited. After a couple hours, the two boys ran out of the house desperately gagging and looking for fresh air. Neither knew what was wrong with their house, but they weren't going to let a smelly house ruin their party, and so they called up their friends and told them to still come over. Once there were about a dozen people, they all jumped into the pool and began splashing around. As soon as I knew they were in the pool, I snuck around to the front of the house and removed the valve stems from every tire of every car in the driveway, flattening all of the tires, and then went back inside my house to watch the carnage unfold. It didn't take long for people to realize that the pool was turning their skin blue, and while some tried to rush into the house to wash it off, others tried to go to their cars to drive home and wash it off there. Those that ran inside quickly ran right back out, and those that had tried to use their cars were also frustrated, and they returned to stand by the pool. None of them knew what to do, and as the sun set, none of them had come up with a plan. They ended up sleeping in the backyard that night, but the kicker was that around 10 at night, a wild thunderstorm rolled in and drenched all of them in cold rain. By the time the morning came, there were dozens of blue teenagers that sat around Ralph's pool crying and miserable and unsure what to do. It was then that Ralph came home, and he and his wife saw all the cars in their driveway and went around out back to see why the party was still going. The boys told them everything that had happened, and Ralph knew instantly that I had a hand in it, and so he called the police. Much like I had experienced, though, they told him that there wasn't anything that they could do as there were no witnesses. 2 days later, there was a for sale sign on their front yard. I heard through other neighbors that they had tried to get rid of the rotten egg smell, but couldn't. They had even hired professional cleaners, and they could not get rid of the smell. They really didn't have much of a choice, and so they chose to sell. After a couple of weeks, they found a buyer, but because of the smell, they lost a lot of money on the sale. The new owner had pretty much given them less than half of what the house was actually worth, and so they moved away. Bobby and Teddy were both stained blue from head to toe for months on end. I know this because I saw them more than once completely blue. Ralph and his wife ended up buying a house on the opposite side of town, and I was very happy. We passed by each other from time to time, but thankfully I never had to deal with Ralph or his sons ever again. So maybe I went a bit too far, but after what they had put us through, I'm just grateful that they caved in and sold their house as quickly as they did. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. After that, my life continued spiraling. We were soon done with college, and my dad got me a car as a gift. Of course, Johnson received nothing, but he still didn't mind. Johnson immediately began applying for jobs. When he finally got one, my parents stopped feeding him.
Just 1 month, please. I haven't received my first salary. I can't survive without food, please.
Do I look like I care about your existence? I have my son. You're just an unwanted duplicate. If you can't feed yourself at this age, then shame on you.
Shame on me? But you still feed Jonathan and you never complain. All I ask for is a month and I'll never bother you guys again. How dare you compare yourself with Jonathan? Just because you stole his face doesn't mean you're him, got it? He's the only one I consider my son, and I refuse to shoulder your responsibility. You're grown. Take care of yourself.
It's strange how life can change so fast, so drastically, and yet, when you look back, every step seems like inevitable. My name is Jonathan, and I had a twin brother. Well, had, not because he died, but because he's no more in my life. I chased him out. Growing up, I was the star, the golden child, the genius, the apple of my parents' eyes. I saw how they adored me, looked at me with pride and admiration every time I brought home a perfect score or another certificate. To them, I was brilliant, a future doctor or engineer, someone with the promise of greatness. But my twin, Johnson, was just there, fading into the background.
Jonathan, you're going to do big things one day, aren't you? You're already making us so proud. I can't wait to see what the future holds for you and us, your parents.
She'd say this right in front of Johnson, as if he wasn't even there. It was as if he were a shadow, something that was there, but didn't matter enough to be noticed. And Johnson, he'd just sit there, pretending he didn't hear, but his eyes always showed he was sad. I sometimes caught the way he clenched his fists, but he never said anything. He'd just swallow whatever pain or hurt he was feeling. It only got worse as we grew older. My dad was no different. To him, Johnson was just a disappointment, a reminder of everything average and unremarkable.
You're so clumsy, awkward, and dull. Why can't you be more like Jonathan?
That question soon became a chant in our house. And it wasn't like Johnson didn't try. He'd study late into the night, his textbooks spread out on his desk, his eyes red and tired. But no matter how hard he worked, he could never match my scores, never reach the bar that had been set for me. And eventually, I think he stopped trying altogether. For me, life was easy. I got whatever I wanted, new clothes, the best school supplies, the latest gadgets. And I knew that, as long as I kept my grades high, I could get away with anything. The first time I was reported for skipping school, my dad blamed the school for not making classes interesting for me.
He's a brilliant child. If your school wasn't bad, he'd never skip. If my child doesn't return home today from wherever your incompetence made him run off to, I'll report this school.
When I came home late, reeking of cigarettes and sweat, they just brushed it off.
Boys will be boys.
They laughed and then patted me on the shoulder as if my behavior were just a phase. I took advantage of that freedom. I started running with a rough crowd, kids who knew how to bend the rules, and soon I was smoking, drinking, doing things my parents would have grounded anyone else for. But for me, they looked the other way, always assuming the best. After all, I was a genius. What harm could I do? But as I sank deeper into that world, my grades started slipping, but my reputation as the genius stayed intact. I began blackmailing teachers to scare them into compliance, making sure they kept my scores at the top. They were afraid of me, afraid of what I'd do if they crossed me. And my parents? They didn't suspect a thing. They kept showering me with praise, convinced I was still their perfect son. I was behind the gym at home one day, puffing on a cigarette, when I saw Johnson watching me. He had a horrified look in his eyes, and for a second, I thought he'd run and tell our parents. But instead, he just walked over to me and tried to talk to me, to reason with me.
Jonathan, you don't have to do this. It's dangerous and could damage your life. There's so much more you could be.
I looked at him, that kid who was supposed to be my twin but felt like a stranger, and I felt a surge of anger. Who was he to lecture me, to tell me what I could and couldn't do? So I snapped. I beat him up, right there, until he was lying on the ground, bruised and bleeding. I told him to keep his mouth shut, or I'd make him regret it. When we got into the house, my parents didn't ask what happened, didn't even care enough to wonder why he looked so beat up. Their only concern was that I was safe, that their prized son had come home unharmed.
Jonathan, I'm so glad you're home. Let's order pizza to celebrate your last test score.
Later that night, I thought about it. I'd hurt my own brother, my own flesh and blood, and no one cared. In a way, it was thrilling, proof that I held all the power in our family. After that, my life continued spiraling. We were soon done with college, and my dad got me a car as a gift. Of course, Johnson received nothing, but he still didn't mind. Johnson immediately began applying for jobs. When he finally got one, my parents stopped feeding him.
Just 1 month, please. I haven't received my first salary. I can't survive without food, please.
Do I look like I care about your existence? I have my son. You're just an unwanted duplicate. If you can't feed yourself at this age, then shame on you.
Shame on me? But you still feed Jonathan and you never complain. All I ask for is a month and I'll never bother you guys again. How dare you compare yourself with Jonathan? Just because you stole his face doesn't mean you're him, got it? He's the only one I consider my son, and I refuse to shoulder your responsibility. You're grown. Take care of yourself. I can't tell how he did it, but Johnson managed to survive the whole of the first month without my parents feeding him. Life after college was too boring. I didn't have a job, couldn't even get a stable girlfriend, so I moved on to heavier drugs, stronger drinks, and anything that my friends brought to drown my thoughts. Johnson stayed out of my way. He was just there, existing in the same house, but barely part of my world. He was hardly ever at home because his work required him to work late. I doubt my parents ever noticed that. They were too busy working hard to take care of my needs to notice someone they thought of as a nobody. But still, something about him bothered me. His silence, his calm acceptance of the unfairness, the way he never fought back. I hated him for it. I wanted him to react,
to give me a reason to hate him more. So I started making his life miserable, little by little. I'd steal money from my parents and blame it on him, mess with his things, humiliate him every chance I got. I was relentless, testing the limits of his patience, waiting for him to snap. But he never did. He'd just take it, and that only made me angrier. Then one day, he was gone. He left a note, simple and to the point. He thanked our parents for bringing him into the world, but he said he couldn't stay in a place where he wasn't wanted. He was leaving, for good. When I showed the note to my parents, they barely reacted.
Good riddance. He was useless here anyways. I barely even remember his existence sometimes.
I also thought it was good that he left, but I soon realized that not seeing him regularly anymore was making me feel empty. So, I threw myself deeper into partying, drinking, smoking, anything that numbed the strange ache inside me. Then, I discovered gambling. It was thrilling at first, the high of the stakes, the rush of winning. But soon, it turned dark. I started losing, and as my debts piled, I switched gears. I gambled away my car, my phone, anything of value. Eventually, I even stole my parents' house documents, and I lost that too, in a single, disastrous bet. When my parents found out, they were devastated. My dad managed to get us a small apartment, but he was broken. For the first time, he looked at me with something other than pride. He begged me to stop, to change. He'd lost everything, and I was all he had left.
Jonathan, please. You're all we have left. Please change.
I promised I would, but promises were easy to break. I kept gambling, stealing, doing whatever I could to keep feeding the addiction that had taken over my life. One night, I gambled with the wrong people. When I couldn't pay them, they came after my parents. My parents paid the price for my mistakes. They died because of me. After that, everything went black. I took harder drugs, stopped eating, stopped caring. I roamed the streets until the government picked me up and placed me here, in this rehab center. One day, I was sitting in the common room when I saw Johnson, my twin, on the television screen. He was being interviewed as a writer and actor. He was famous, successful, everything I'd once thought I would be. The interviewer asked him about his family, and his response broke something inside me.
I don't have a family, I'm on my own.
And in that moment, everything hit me. All those years I'd spent tormenting him, trying to destroy him, it had all been for nothing. While I'd torn myself apart, trying to bring him down, he'd risen, using the pain I'd caused as fuel for his success. I sat there in tears. I destroyed myself, thinking I was destroying him. And now here I was, alone, a broken man with nothing left, watching my twin brother on the television, a man of success and dignity. I decided to write him a letter to ask for his forgiveness. I talked to the authorities at the rehab center, and they allowed me and even helped me post the letter to him. I expected a heartfelt response, him telling me he'd forgiven me and asking if we wanted our family back. I expected that. However, his reaction was far from that. It was short and shattered my heart. All he said as a response to my letter was, "Sorry, I don't know you." I cried that night like I'd never cried before. I'd lost him forever, no doubt. And I dared not even blame him. He deserved to be happy, and I deserved to pay for everything I did to him. He was my twin, and I should have been nicer to him. I should have stood by him when my parents were torturing him with their favoritism, but I never did. I was a bad brother, and he had every right to cut me off just like I did. I didn't try contacting him again. The next year, when I left the rehab center, I had to live in a very small apartment provided by the government for people like me. Do I regret everything I did? Absolutely. In fact, I would change it all if I had the power to turn back the clock. But that's impossible. Money was tight, and instead of getting a job, I turned to selling drugs. One early morning, I heard a loud bang as the police knocked down my door. They came in with dogs, searched my apartment, found the drugs, and I was locked up. Now, I have to live the rest of my life in prison, burdened with guilt over my parents' death and for separating my brother from our family. Yes, my parents played a huge part in what happened, but he didn't deserve any of it, and they didn't deserve to die. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed and we will try our best to reply to your comment. I told you that I would kill you if you crossed me again. You're too stupid to have that dog, and so I liberated it from you. But since you broke into my house, I'll break into yours and kill you and take that dog back. Oddly enough, Vince hadn't noticed the police had arrived, and they heard everything that he had said. Seeing him with a weapon, the police drew their own guns and pointed them at him. Sir, put down the gun and back away from that house now. What are you idiots doing here? Just shut up. This doesn't concern you. Sir, I said for you to put the gun down now. Vince, of course, didn't listen, and he turned, and in a fit of anger, he shot at the police. I knew that he had been unstable, but I hadn't realized just how unstable he was. One of the officers was hit by Vince's shots, but the other fired back and hit Vince and caused him to fall to the ground. The whole thing was over in a matter of seconds, but it terrified me. Hi there, my name is Rick, and I recently moved into a new neighborhood, and it was one of the most horrible experiences in my life. I had gotten promoted at work a few months ago, and my income had grown enough that I felt very comfortable buying a small house and moving out of my small bachelor pad apartment. It had served me well for many years, but I had always wanted something bigger and to stop paying rent as well. And so, I started looking for a house that would fit my needs perfectly. One that especially had a fully fenced-in backyard, because I had also always wanted a dog as well. So when I found a cozy bungalow in a quiet neighborhood that was within my price range, I thought that I had found my dream home. But the problems started very quickly after I moved in. The day that I moved in, I met my neighbor Vince, and let's just say that we did not hit it off right away. Our driveways were right next to each other's, and I had just assumed that it wouldn't be a problem. But boy, was I wrong. I parked the moving truck I had rented on what I had thought was my driveway, but Vince thought differently. Hi there, my name is Rick. I don't care what your name is. Get that piece of crap off of my property. What? Sorry, I really thought that I was far enough over with the truck. It's probably 10 feet from your property. You could not be more wrong, bud. You can either move it or I will go into my house and get my gun and make you move it. Got it? He looked like he was being serious, and so I jumped into the truck and moved it half onto my front lawn. After that, I moved my belongings into my house, and thankfully, I didn't see Vince for the rest of the day. But that one interaction was enough to make me very afraid of him, and I honestly didn't know what to do about him. I did call the police, but they told me that even though they had received word that he had threatened other people in the past, that they had no legal recourse against him since he hadn't waved his gun around. I found that incredibly infuriating, but friends of mine told me to just let it go for now, but to keep an eye on things and get the police involved should things get worse. Of course, it didn't take long for things to get worse though. A few weeks later, I came home to find both driveways full of vehicles, none of which I recognized. I knew that I should leave it alone, but I couldn't. I called the police and told them what had happened, and again, they told me that there was nothing they could do and that I needed to call and have the cars towed away if it bothered me that much. And so rather than confronting Vince, I called for a tow truck to remove the cars that were parked on my portion of the driveway. When it arrived and removed the first car, Vince and his friends rushed out of his house and confronted the tow truck driver. The owner of the car managed to convince the driver not to tow his car away and that he would move it. After that, the owners of the other cars moved their cars onto the street. Meanwhile, though, I ducked into my house so that I could avoid any conflict with either Vince or his friends, but they came and started pounding on my front door. You coward! Why don't you come out here and face us like a man? Why would I do that? There are 6 of you and only 1 of me. Maybe next time, you shouldn't be a jerk and only park on your own driveway. You made such a big deal about me being on yours in spite of the fact that my moving truck was only on my own. And then you park all over my driveway. What kind of self-centered ass are you? The previous owner didn't have a car, and they gave me free use of their driveway whenever I wanted, which means that I can do as I please. If you pull something like this again, I'll make sure it's the last thing that you ever do. After that, Vince and his friends left, but not before they keyed my car and smashed a couple of flower pots that I had on my front porch. When they were for sure gone, I called the police and reported what they had done, and shortly afterwards, 2 officers showed up. One came and spoke to me, while the other went to talk to Vince and his friends. However, after they gathered both our statements, the cops told me that there still wasn't anything that they could do. Vince had more witnesses that backed up his side of the story, and since I didn't have any way to prove that they had parked on my driveway or had threatened me and destroyed my property, then it was my word against his, and unfortunately, he had witnesses. I was enraged by that point. My own neighbor had threatened my life twice now, and the police refused to do anything. I couldn't help but wonder, what did he have to do for them to finally do their damn jobs? After that, things were fairly quiet, and while I wondered how long it would last, I enjoyed the peace and quiet and decided that one thing that would help me feel better would be for me to finally get a dog. If nothing else, having a pet would help me to relax and enjoy my new home. And so, I went down to the shelter and found the cutest puppy there and brought him home. It took some effort, but the dog took very well to being trained, and shortly after coming home with me, he was housebroken, and we began to play in my backyard every night after I got home from work. Things were really beginning to look up, but of course, my happiness would be short-lived. After all, I lived next door to a psychopath. One day on the way home from work, I picked up some new toys for my puppy and was looking forward to playing with him when I got home, but I found my house empty. I searched high and low for him, but could not find him anywhere. I knew that he had to be in the house or the backyard, as there was no way for him to get out. I examined every square inch of the fence to make sure there were no holes in it, and after looking it over twice, I was at a loss for words. That's when I heard it. From Vince's house, I heard the faint sound of a dog barking. While I had no way to know for sure that it was my dog, I knew that Vince did not have a dog of his own, and that he was crazy enough to kidnap mine. I knew that he must have lured my dog through the doggy door and had kidnapped him from my backyard while I was at work. On the one hand, I could call the police and ask them to try to get my dog back, but Vince could just say that it was his dog, and then it would be my word against his once again. So instead, I waited until I saw Vince leave his house. Once I knew he was gone, I jumped over our fence, and using a hammer and a crowbar, I broke into his house through his back door. I then followed the sounds of my dog barking and found him locked up in Vince's basement. I busted the lock on the door and freed him and took him back home. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when Vince got home, but I decided that I would call the police and tell them that I saw some random person break into Vince's house while he was gone. I was smart enough to wear a mask and gloves, so I knew that should they investigate that, at the very least, they wouldn't find evidence that I had done it. Or at least that was my hope. And that the police told me that they would be over in a few minutes, but Vince arrived first. He stormed into his house, and after a minute, I heard him scream out in anger from inside my own house. Scared, I went to peek out my window and saw him run out of his house armed with rifle and then head towards my house. I hid and prayed that the police would soon arrive, and as he pounded on my door, they thankfully did.
I told you that I would kill you if you crossed me again. You're too stupid to have that dog, and so I liberated it from you. But since you broke into my house, I'll break into yours and kill you and take that dog back.
Oddly enough, Vince hadn't noticed the police had arrived, and they heard everything that he had said. Seeing him with a weapon, the police drew their own guns and pointed them at him.
Sir, put down the gun and back away from that house now. What are you idiots doing here? Just shut up. This doesn't concern you. Sir, I said for you to put the gun down now.
Vince, of course, didn't listen, and he turned, and in a fit of anger, he shot at the police. I knew that he had been unstable, but I hadn't realized just how unstable he was. One of the officers was hit by Vince's shots, but the other fired back and hit Vince and caused him to fall to the ground. The whole thing was over in a matter of seconds, but it terrified me. Minutes later, the neighborhood was swarming with police and paramedics. Neither Vince or the cop were dead, but both were very badly injured and were rushed to the nearest hospital. Once they were gone, the remaining police asked me questions, and I stuck to the story about a stranger breaking into Vince's house. They already knew about our relationship and that Vince was notorious for being hostile and unstable. When they didn't find my fingerprints or signs that I was the one that broke into the house, they believed my story. I was so incredibly grateful, but I had decided that I was done. There was no way that I was going to take a chance and stay there any longer. I had no idea what was going to happen to Vince, and on the odd chance that he was going to be returning to his house, I decided that I was done living there, and I listed my house for sale. It didn't take long for me to sell my house, and I actually managed to make a little bit of profit on it, which was unexpected. I took my money, and I moved across the country to a quiet dead-end street. Thankfully, my job was able to transfer me to the office that was closest to my new house, which made things easy for me. It didn't hurt that my new neighbors were young families and were extremely friendly and welcoming. It took a few months, but I eventually felt at home and safe and happy that I had gotten far away from Vince. As for him, though, that day went very badly for him. The cop that had shot him permanently injured his hip, which meant that Vince would not only have chronic pain in his hip for the rest of his life, but that he needed a walker in order to walk, and even then, it was very difficult for him. However, that was the good news for him. He had finally crossed the line, and having shot a police officer, he had the book thrown at him, and he was sentenced to prison for 15 years. While in prison, he had been forced to declare bankruptcy, and he had lost his house. Hearing that made me feel silly for selling mine so quickly, but the peace of mind that doing so brought me was worth it. After all, I didn't want any of Vince's friends to come looking for me to get revenge on his behalf. So in the end, the police finally did do their jobs, but I'll be honest, I'm still a bit angry that it took Vince shooting someone before they finally did anything, although I do feel a little guilty. After all, if I hadn't broken into his house to get my dog back, that officer wouldn't have been shot, but there's no way of knowing what would have happened instead. I'm just glad to finally be living in my dream house with lovable puppy and having friendly and most importantly sane neighbors. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.
Thankfully, Daniela was too stupid to double-check what the new address was, and she believed me. I figured that we could always call her up last minute and give her the proper address, but at least this way, she couldn't do anything that could jeopardize our chances of being married. It paid off. The night before the wedding, David and I chose to stay at a hotel near to the venue we were actually going to get married at when suddenly David got a phone call. When he answered the phone, his face went white.
Wait a minute. She did what?
David, what's wrong?
It's the police. They are saying that my mother went to the new police station downtown. The one that used to be a nightclub, but was renovated to have offices inside for police officers. Well, she was caught trying to set the building on fire. However, she fled the scene when she finally realized the mistake she had made.
The police wanted to know if we knew where she was. I never expected to fall in love with someone like David. We met at a cafe, the kind of chance encounter you only hear about in movies. I was sitting alone, flipping through a book, when he sat down at the table next to me, his coffee spilling slightly as he fumbled with the chair.
Sorry to disturb you. My name is David. Can I join you?
Oh, why yes, of course. He smiled, and it was over for me right then and there. That warm, easygoing grin, the kind that pulls you in and makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. I smiled back, blushing, and from that moment, we started talking. Hours passed like minutes, and before I knew it, we were exchanging phone numbers. We went on our first date a few days later, and after that, it felt like we couldn't spend enough time together. We laughed at the same jokes, shared the same values, and while I usually overthink things, being with David felt effortless. It felt like everything was falling into place. It wasn't long before I met his family, more specifically, his mother, Daniela. She had been a single mother ever since David's father left her when she was 2 months pregnant, so she never got married. She had loved her only son, David, so much all these years when I met her. And that's when things got complicated. I remember the first time I met her. David had warned me that she could be a bit intense, but nothing could have prepared me for the cold, appraising stare she gave me when I walked into their home. Daniela was a sharp-featured woman, her hair perfectly styled, her clothes immaculate, but her expression was ice.
Mom, this is Jesse.
This creature is Jessie? That's an interesting name.
Thank you, I think.
Where are you from, dear?
I was born in Seattle, but my parents are from South Korea.
I guess that's why they gave you a boy's name. They just didn't know any better. Silly foreigners. Well, dinner's in 10 minutes. I hope you don't expect me to cook any weird South Korean foods.
The evening only got worse. Every attempt I made to connect with her was met with a frosty comment or a dismissive glance. David noticed, of course. He squeezed my hand under the table, offering silent support. But it was clear to both of us that Daniela didn't approve of me. And it didn't take a genius to figure out why. Of course, I had encountered racist people before, but I had never imagined having the mother of someone I was dating be so aggressive towards me. As time passed, it became increasingly obvious that Daniela wasn't just indifferent toward me. She downright hated me. David tried to brush it off at first, telling me she was just old-fashioned, but it was more than that. It was the way she avoided looking at me, the way she talked about proper families and tradition whenever I was around, her not-so-subtle digs at my appearance, my culture, everything.
She'll come around. Once she realizes that I really love you and that we are perfect for one another, I'm sure that she will change her mind.
If you say so, but honestly, I don't think she will. She really hates me.
Please, just be patient with her for me. I know deep down that she can be reached.
Things escalated when we told her we were getting married. David and I had been talking about marriage for months. We both knew we were ready. One night, over takeout and a bottle of wine, he got down on one knee and pulled out a ring. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was perfect, because it was us. Simple, genuine, and full of love. We were on cloud 9, until we told her about the wonderful news.
You're getting what?
We're getting married, Mom. This is great news. We really love each other and can't wait to start a family.
You can't be serious. How can you possibly even think to have children with someone like her?
I'm very serious. I love Jessie, and I want to spend the rest of my life with her. Honestly, what has gotten into you? What is so wrong with her?
David, you barely know this girl, that's all. You've only been dating for a year.
It doesn't matter how long it's been. I know she's the one. Can you at least pretend to be happy for us?
You think you know, but you don't. Marrying someone like her, someone from such a different background, it's a mistake.
I felt my stomach churn. Someone like her. She couldn't even bring herself to say the words Asian or Korean. I'd had my share of racism growing up, but it hit different when it was coming from the mother of the man you loved. It really hurt that she was being this way, but David standing up to her and sticking up for me did make it easier to handle.
I can't believe you would be this way. I'm so disappointed in you. This isn't up for debate, Mom. We're getting married, and you can either be a part of it, or you can choose not to be.
You're making a terrible mistake.
After that, we decided to ignore her. We didn't let her ruin our happiness and just started planning the wedding. It was so exciting, and we were determined to make it the best day of our lives. However, Daniela wasn't done. She was determined to sabotage it. The first thing she did was accidentally cancel our venue reservation. We had found the perfect place, a beautiful garden just outside the city, and we were thrilled when we booked it. But a week later, we got a call saying the reservation had been canceled. After some investigating, we found out that Daniela had called, pretending to be me, and told them we had changed our minds. David was furious. He confronted her, but Daniela just shrugged it off.
I was doing you a favor. That place was too small for a proper wedding anyway.
We rebooked another venue, and this time we made sure only the two of us had access to the reservation. It paid off since she attempted to do the same thing, but the venue had been warned, and so they didn't allow it to be canceled like the last time. Next, Daniela started spreading rumors about us. She told David's extended family that I was using him for his money, that I was a gold digger who had manipulated my way into his life. Some of them believed her, and we started receiving less than warm responses from people we had once considered close. David's anger only grew.
I don't care what they think. I know the truth, and that's all that matters. But it stings. You would think people know how my mother is and ignore her.
It's okay, David. It doesn't change the fact that we love each other, and plus we can weed out the people that don't know us well enough to come to the wedding. It makes it cheaper for us. I could tell that this was wearing on him. No one wanted their mother to hate their fiancé, and Daniela wasn't letting up. It seemed like every week she found a new way to try to derail our wedding plans, from misplacing important documents to showing up uninvited to meetings with our wedding planner. We tried to ignore her, pushing forward with our plans, but she kept trying to do everything in her power to stop us from getting married. 3 weeks before the big day, I called her up and told her that there was a last-minute address change. It didn't take much to convince her that the hall where we were to be married was being renovated, and we were forced to move to a different address. Thankfully, Daniela was too stupid to double-check what the new address was, and she believed me. I figured that we could always call her up last minute and give her the proper address, but at least this way, she couldn't do anything that could jeopardize our chances of being married. It paid off. The night before the wedding, David and I chose to stay at a hotel near to the venue we were actually going to get married at, when suddenly David got a phone call. When he answered the phone, his face went white.
Wait a minute. She did what?
David, what's wrong?
It's the police. They are saying that my mother went to the new police station downtown. The one that used to be a nightclub, but was renovated to have offices inside for police officers. Well, she was caught trying to set the building on fire. However, she fled the scene when she finally realized the mistake she had made.
The police wanted to know if we knew where she was. We, of course, didn't, but we suspected that we could tempt her to reveal where she was. That was when I told David to call her up and ask if she needed help. Smiling, he did just that. He knew exactly what I was planning.
Hey, Mom. Listen, I don't know why they would be after you, but the police keep asking me where you are. It sounds like they want to blame you for a crime you didn't commit.
Oh my God, David, that's terrible.
Oh, I know. Listen, I need you to meet me at the airport. We'll buy you a ticket to go somewhere tropical until things calm down.
Oh, thank you, David. And what about Jessie?
I'm done with her. The police suspect she was the one that set the fire.
I did my best not to laugh. David was acting so well. As soon as he hung up the phone, the two of us burst out laughing hysterically. We then called the police and told them exactly where to find David's mother. Trying to flee the country would not look good for her, but after what she had attempted to do, we didn't care. She had been a problem to start with, but she had crossed a serious line. It didn't take the police long to find her and arrest her, although she did fight back and even ran through the airport until the police finally tackled her to the ground and even tased her. When I heard that they had been rough with her, it made me smile. It's petty, I know, but she is just such an awful person that it felt nice to see someone get their just desserts like she was. Of course, there had been witnesses. People had seen Daniela attempt to set the building on fire, and gasoline was found in her car. She had tried to burn our wedding down. Literally. David was beside himself with rage. He drove straight to the police station where she was being held. When we got there, the police allowed us to go and see her, and Daniela didn't even try to deny it.
You were making a mistake. I had to stop it. Wait a minute, what are you doing with her? I thought you told me you broken up with her.
You tried to burn down our wedding venue? What the hell is wrong with you?
But I did what I had to do. You'll thank me later.
Thank you? You've done nothing but try to ruin my life since the moment I told you I was marrying Jessie. You've lied, sabotaged, and now you've committed a crime. How can you think this is okay?
You're my son. I know what's best for you, even when you don't. Marrying that woman would have been terrible for you. She's not like us. She isn't good enough for you.
You lousy bigot. It's you that isn't good enough to be in our family. We love each other, and we are going to have beautiful children one day, and you will never hear from us again. I hope that you enjoy your time in prison, each day that you wake up behind bars. I want you to remember that you are there all because you couldn't let your hatred for me go. Have the life you deserve, you awful bitch. And with that, I slapped her as hard as I could, and we left her there shouting for us to help her. Without David's assistance, she was unable to get a decent lawyer, and she was sentenced to over 10 years in prison. As for us, David and I got ready and attended our wedding. It was bittersweet, but at the end of the day, we were so happy that we were married and finally able to truly start our lives together. We have had 2 children in the recent years, and we love them dearly. And we have promised that if Daniela ever gets out of prison, that she will never get to know them. We have officially cut her out of our lives, and it's 100% for the better. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment.